Electric cars seemingly exploded on the scene in the 2010s and quickly began dominating some markets across the globe. Today, electric and electrified vehicles make up around 50% of sales in China, about 20% in the EU, and over 95% in Norway. Globally, around 1 in 5 cars sold are EVs. But the electric car didn't spontaneously appear in 2008 with Tesla, or in the 90s with GM's EV1, or even in the 70s with some of those quirky little cars that they came up with for commuters. Actually, EVs predate the gas-powered car by decades, and in early automotive history were the #1 bestseller. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. My name is John, and this is a far too brief history of the surprisingly long history of the electric vehicle. The first usable self-propelled device, essentially a tractor engine for pulling heavy loads, was designed by the French Army captain Nicolas Joseph Cugnot in 1769. With poor performance, the project was abandoned, but not before it's rumored he ran his second prototype into a stone wall, becoming not only the first motorist, but also having the first auto accident. In 1827, Hungarian priest Enyos Jedlik built the first electric motor, establishing the template for future direct current motors, and he used it to power a small model car. In 1839, Scottish chemist and inventor Robert Davidson created the first electric vehicle that could move under its own power, and he went on to show electric locomotives were possible, although they weren't accepted until the 1890s. These early attempts were hampered by the technology of the day, specifically the single-use, non-rechargeable, very primitive batteries like Alessandro Volta's voltaic pile, stacks of metal discs creating a current. Once used, they needed to be replaced. But in 1859, a major breakthrough was made by Gaston Plante with the rechargeable lead-acid battery, which was improved in 1881 by Camille Faure, making it a smaller and more efficient design. In 1881, French inventor Gustave Trouveau took a small motor, the new rechargeable batteries, fitted them to an English Starley tricycle, and invented the first electric car. Unable to patent it, he quickly adapted it to marine propulsion and invented the first outboard motor. By 1883, Parisian carriage manufacturer Charles Gintot began selling an electric buggy with the new batteries, 3 years before Benz created his patent motor wagon. The other first electric car is considered to be by British inventor Thomas Parker in 1884, although only a photo from 1895 exists. He later went on to electrify the London Underground. The first production electric car is considered to be the appropriately named Flocken Elektrowagen in 1888, a high-wheeler like contemporary Benz designs, but with a 1-horsepower motor capable of propelling it up to a blistering 9 miles an hour. In 1890, yet another Scotsman, this time living in Des Moines, Iowa, named William Morrison, applied for a patent for an electric carriage he'd built in 1887, and which was reported to have been in a parade in 1888. It made 4 horsepower and could go 20 miles an hour for 50 miles. By 1897, the Electrobat was created and used as a taxi in New York City by the Electric Vehicle Company. By 1900, they had over 200 electric taxis in service, and instead of taking time to recharge them, they bought an ice skating rink to serve as a battery swapping station. Their battery supplier became the company Exide, and its partner who built gas-powered cars, Pope, took its bicycle business called Columbia to create electric cars and became the first to reach 1,000 units built years before Olds or Ford did it. 1897 also brought electric taxis to London, with the Bursey taxi as the first self-propelled hacks in London. While Walter Bursey once said, quote, "There is no apparent limit to the hopes and expectations of the electric artisans. In short, it is the natural power which shall be the most intimate and effective of all man's assets." Within 2 years, the taxis had proven unreliable and were gone. In 1899, the world's first electric police car was a wagon for the Akron Police Department. Built by Akron Collins Buggy Company, it cost $2,400 and could do 18 miles per hour with a range of 30 miles. Unfortunately, in a 1900 riot, it was pushed into the Ohio Canal but later recovered and rebuilt. In the late 19th century, electrics held almost all the speed records, and by 1899, the first car to exceed 60 miles per hour was an electric auto using 102-volt batteries with a total of 67 horsepower and the innovative Michelin pneumatic rubber tires. Let's take a step back and review the situation at the start of the 20th century. Gas-powered cars were noisy, smelly, unreliable, fuel inefficient, and dangerous to start with a hand crank. Steam-powered cars took as much as 30 minutes to warm up, and for long drives you needed to have additional water as well as fuel. And electrics were outselling gas with nearly 40% of the market, as it was quiet, easy to start, easy to operate, but limited by battery range and expense, often costing twice as much as other cars. EVs sold well, at least in large cities where electricity was available, and much like today, there were publicly available chargers, as this map from New York in 1923 showed the distribution of charging locations. Short trips were the norm, and as roads outside cities were often just dirt tracks, if you planned on taking a longer trip, you took the train. Famous early pioneers experimented with electrics, including the 1898 Egger-Loher C2 Phaeton with a motor designed by Ferdinand Porsche. The first cars by Ransom Olds were electric, and even carriage maker Studebaker built EVs before transitioning to gas-powered cars. Famously, Thomas Edison owned a 1902 Studebaker. In 1901, President McKinley was taken to the hospital after an assassination attempt in an electric ambulance, and Teddy Roosevelt took the first public presidential ride in a car in a Columbia Electric in 1902. By 1908, the Ford Model T was released and on its way to establishing gas-powered cars as the standard, while major oil finds like Texas Spindletop created a cheap and readily available fuel source. Ford himself was not anti-EV, however, as he worked with Edison to develop an affordable model, and in 1914, his wife Clara drove an electric from Detroit Electric that marketed itself as easy to start for women. As a comparison, the Detroit Electric cost $3,730 at a time when a Model T cost $440. But the real innovation that killed EVs was the electric starter. First patented in 1903 and improved and used by Cadillac for 1912, this made getting going easy and safer for everyone, and ongoing advances such as mufflers and rubber engine mounts made gas vehicles far quieter, and the longer range and ease of refueling outside cities sealed the deal. In the 1910s, Standard Electric claimed a 110-mile range and a top speed of 20 miles an hour, using a tiller to steer and costing about $1,900. In 1913, Beardsley Electric Company in LA produced 661 electric cars with a range of 70 miles for about $1,285. By 1915, the Woods Dual Power was on the market. Initially an EV manufacturer, they created the Dual Power with a 4-cylinder engine and electric power. It could motivate by electrons below 15 miles per hour, wherein the gas plant could take over. With a patent based on FENS, it was shockingly similar to today's hybrids, including regenerative braking. By 1918, after World War I, gas cars were far more reliable, comfortable, and easy to use. New roads were appearing with service stations and fuel pumps along the routes connecting cities. Petrol power had won, and by 1920, most EV companies were gone except for a few low-volume producers. Thus came the dark ages of electric vehicles, and innovation stagnated for nearly 40 years. In the 1950s, the Henny Kilowatt was produced based on the French Renault Dauphine, with a top speed of 60 miles an hour and a range measured at 1 hour. Improved performance didn't offset the fact that it cost nearly double a standard Dauphine. By the mid-60s, a few concept cars began to appear. The Scottish aviation Scamp City car was under consideration. AMC was invested in EVs with products like the Amatron of 1967, but in 1966, GM set the template for the modern EV with the 1966 Electrovare, using DC batteries, AC motor, and an inverter. History was made for the electric vehicle in 1971 by the Lunar Roving Vehicle, developed by Boeing and Delco. Early pollution regulations and the energy crises of the 70s renewed interest in EVs. Clive Sinclair, who made millions with his self-named personal computers, created his C5, only to watch it bomb on the market. In 1971, the Electric Fuel Propulsion Company of Michigan converted the AMC Hornet to the ElectraSport, and notably creating an electric car expressway between Detroit and Chicago with 6 charging stations at Holiday Inn hotels. With a 3-speed manual transmission connected to a 20-horsepower motor, it used 24 6-volt cobalt lead batteries that could be recharged up to 80% in 45 minutes. Others working on the conversions included Jet Industries with the Electravan 600, 750, and 007 based on the Dodge Omni. The current fare was based on the Fairmont, the change of pace based on the Pacer, and the U.S. electric car had a converted Prism. In 1974, the sexy city car was introduced and later renamed the commuter car. Early models had a 2.5 horsepower motor and a 36-volt battery, upgraded later to a 3.5 horsepower motor and 48-volt battery. By 1976, they were number 6 in auto manufacturing in the United States. The 1978 Electravet was another GM project, this time a 2-seater with a shortened wheelbase providing a range of about 50 miles and a top speed of 53 miles an hour. By the 80s, fuel was once again cheap, big cars were in demand, and most EV research stagnated. In 1990, California's CARB, low-emission vehicle program, required 2% of all new vehicles sold to be zero emissions by 1998, rising to 10% by 2003. Major automakers dusted off their EV designs. In 1993, Selectra offered a conversion of the Chevy S10 pickup called the E10, while US Electricar offered one starting in 94, and by 97, GM offered the front-wheel drive S10 EV using the motor from the EV1. Famously, in 1996, GM introduced the EV1, the first mass-produced EV in the modern era. Through 2 short generations, it was only leased to owners through Saturn dealers. Teased with the 1990 Impact concept car, the EV1 used an AC induction motor making 137 horsepower and 110 pound-feet of torque, powered initially by lead-acid batteries, giving a range between 60 and 100 miles. The second generation gained slightly larger lead-acid Panasonic batteries, but also added a nickel metal hydride option that was much lighter and raised the range to between 75 and 150 miles. Infamously, GM refused to extend the leases of any EV1s and canceled the project after 1999, crushing most of them. Out of around 1,100 produced, only an estimated 40 are still in existence, including one at the Henry Ford Museum. Due to the development costs and low sales, GM apparently lost money on each EV1, but conspiracies continue that GM self-sabotaged their EV and hybrid programs and that big gas pressured automakers to abandon their efforts. Between 1997 and 2003, Toyota offered a RAV4 EV with a top speed of 78 and a range of 95 miles. And again, between 2012 and 2014, a second generation, now working jointly with Tesla, with a range of between 80 and 120 miles. In 1998, Ford offered a Ranger EV until 2002, first with lead-acid batteries and later with nickel metal hydride added in 1999. The big breakthrough in EVs didn't come from automakers' developments, but from the consumer electronics industry. Ongoing battery research through the decades had yielded the lithium-ion batteries introduced in 1991 and that quickly spread with firms like Sony using them in camcorders, mobile phones, and laptops. In 1998, the Nissan Ultra used an experimental version, but widespread adoption truly started with the Tesla Roadster from 2008, and it became the industry standard. Until 2015, the top seller of electric vehicles was GEM, Global Electric Motor Cars, with over 50,000 sold worldwide. Founded in 1992 by ex-General Motors engineers, their first vehicle came in 1998 with a 48-volt car for 2 passengers, a top speed of 20 miles an hour. Later improvements upped the speed to 25, a 72-volt battery system, rechargeable in 6 to 8 hours, and a range of between 30 and 100 miles depending on the battery used. Their success was facilitated by the NHTSA establishing the low-speed vehicle or the neighborhood electric vehicle classification, making GEMs street legal on roads with speeds up to 35 miles an hour. By the late 2000s, however, major manufacturers were jumping in with new EVs. For 2009, the Mitsubishi i-MieV, a rear-wheel drive electric making about 66 horsepower and capable of 80 miles per hour from a 16 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion pack and a US-rated 62 miles of range, although other tests did yield closer to 100 miles. This car was also sold as the Citroën C0 in Europe. Of note, in 2011, they displayed a woody version of the i-MieV at the LA Auto Show, and now you can't unsee that. Nissan then jumped in with the 2010 Leaf, looking much more conventional. With 110 horsepower and a range of 100 miles, it helped the EV continue to move mainstream and was followed by a second generation in 2018 with updated styling, more power, and a longer range of 151 miles. In 1997, Toyota had launched the Prius hybrid. While not the first hybrid, it went on to become a massive success and added to the idea of the electrified vehicle to the discussion, eliminating the range anxiety associated with pure EVs. Since the 2010s, Tesla has gone on to become the #1 seller of EVs worldwide, although this dominance is under attack by fast-moving Chinese car companies, especially BYD, taking the sales lead in 2025. For all the success modern EVs have had with long ranges and falling prices, headwinds still remain. Changing political environments have left manufacturers with billions of investments they've needed to write off. A lack of a unified strategy regarding charging infrastructure between homeowners, condos, and apartment dwellers, cities for on-street charging, and nationwide, reliable, and properly maintained fast charging has failed to address ongoing range questions for many. Over 100 years ago, the EV was loved for its ease of use and silence, and those attributes remain today. But some of the very same issues of weight, cost, and range also still exist for all the advancements that have been made. The electric car has had an outsized influence on the automobile since before the first Benz. And while cost, weight, and range limitations eventually left it in the shadow of its gas-powered cousins, it is important to remember that at the beginning, it was the #1 choice for city dwellers and for the well-heeled. Eventually, development leaps forward with gas cars such as the starter, fuel availability, quick refueling, compression, and horsepower growth left EVs behind. And while sporadic efforts continued over the decade, we can see it took battery research in other markets to bring about the next generation of EVs. Critics will say that the current EVs from Tesla, Nissan, Rivian, Lucid, and others still have the same disadvantages of range, weight, cost, and charging times. These limitations are being engineered out at ever-increasing rates while battery prices continue to fall and battery development continues. Countries outside the US have shown that a coordinated effort to expand charging access leads to increased adoption of electrified vehicles. Obviously, I didn't try to cover each and every EV in history in this video, including the rise in hybrid electrified vehicles, while ignoring developments in trolleys, railroads, and other off-road electrics like forklifts, instead striving to give a broad timeline of the rise, fall, and rise again of the EV. A special thanks to my patrons who make videos like this possible, and be sure to check out my second channel, All Cars Reacts, where I do reactions, news opinions, and generally vlog about the automotive industry. And as always, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me here today.